Blake, how do you feel about manscaping?
You have to be a man to do manscaping, so I wouldn't know anything about that.
Welcome to the Church Gear Podcast, where we pull the tech out of the booth and onto the stage to share the most outlandish stories and hidden wisdom from the tech trenches. And now, here are your hosts.
I'm your host, Blake Hodges, a man who is still hoping to graduate from millennial to manly man, and I'm here with my co-host who is more manly than Chuck Norris and the Statue of Liberty himself, Toby Walters.
Blake, do you even know who Chuck Norris is?
Yes, because Toby, I have 2 black belts, so Chuck Norris is kind of my demigod. I'd love to fight him one day just so I could say I got knocked out in 2 seconds by Chuck Norris.
There's one of my favorite memes ever is Chuck Norris and Sylvester Stallone. And Sylvester Stallone is asking Chuck Norris, how many push-ups can you do? And Chuck Norris' response is, all of them.
I thought it was, Sylvester Stallone is famous for taking just a ton of hits in Rocky, and then he's not even really a good boxer. He just takes all the pain, and then you're tired, and he knocks you out. So I'm thinking, how many punches of Chuck Norris until he gets tired? Or does Sylvester Stallone's face just concave in?
That's a good question. I think we should put this to the test at some point.
Chuck Norris will win.
I'm sure. So, Blake, I'm a very hairy individual, and you somehow are like as smooth as a baby's bottom all over.
Your wife does like a fluffy werewolf, and I think
that's what she says. Yes,
the werewolf comes from the hair. It's intense.
100%. That's what it is.
We've been on a boat together. I've seen things. It's hairy.
So we had our quarterly offsite leadership meeting just. A week ago, 2 weeks ago?
Still recovering.
We played this little game where everybody anonymously answered 5 questions. And the 5th question was, what's your favorite part of Toby's body?
Cannot believe we're telling this publicly.
And I believe your team, every answer was Toby's hairy something.
Yep. And we will say nothing further from there.
So And it's so fun having my son just turned 11, and he is so proud of his armpit hairs.
Oh, those hair! He's about to go full werewolf.
And so he does. He looks more like you at this point because he's 11. He doesn't have a whole lot of hair. Like, he doesn't have chest hair. He doesn't have facial hair yet. But he is so proud of his armpit hairs. He'll show them to me and say, "Look, Dad, I'm becoming a man."
Yep. If only that's all it took. Yeah. The world would be a better place if everyone was a man just from some armpit hair.
And I see you, Blake, at age 30 going to your dad and being like, "Look, Dad, I've got 3 armpit hairs. I'm becoming a man."
I think I've got like 2.5 right here.
I remember in high school, Blake, have you seen much Seinfeld?
No, I haven't.
Like,
but I know
an episode.
I know who you're talking about, though. I know the cast.
So there was one episode where Jerry starts trimming his chest hair because he thinks he has too much, and he kind of gets carried away and he shaves his entire chest. And so me and my friend group in high school, we loved Seinfeld. And so this kind of became a joke of, okay, who's going to shave their chest? And sure enough,
it was you.
It was me.
Oh my God.
I was the first one. I was way before, Channing Tatum and his, oiled torso and everything.
When you did that, did it come back 5 times fluffier?
Well, you've seen me at Lake Day, Blake. What do you think?
Yes. I think the answer is yes and amen.
So I feel like manscaping has become this new kind of catchphrase, and there's all these products, and it's a real thing for real men, Blake. I know, that's tough for you to understand with whatever you've got, just smooth skin everywhere.
Adam Scheffner, one of basically the top reporter for the NFL, he got banned from his work for a couple weeks because he did an ad for Manscaped.
I wonder if there's a future for me in manscaping ads.
I think there is. They're honestly one of the biggest podcast ads. And speaking of the most recent recipient of the best facial hair in production and the owner of Summit Integrations, Nick Kofahl. Nick, welcome to the show. Do you plan on shaving your beard mid-show?
Man, you guys would have to pay me a lot of money to do that, but maybe I will. Maybe next time. I don't really have the tools in front of me to be able to make that happen, but we can see what happens,
And Nick, do you remember where you and I met the first time?
Was it at a shaving convention?
I don't actually.
So we were at the SALT conference in Nashville.
That's right.
A year and a half ago, and you were combing your beard in the mirror in the men's room.
That's right.
And so I stood next to you and I looked over, and there's no mistaking that beautifully groomed facial masterpiece. And he was, sure enough, he was.
Well, thank you so much.
He was grooming in the mirror.
See, I remember when we first met Nick, because like that was our first conference. My brain is on an 11, like just so excited. And all I remember was you talked to some guy who was a big deal and had cool shoes. And so Nick was the cool shoes guy before he was even the Summit guy to me, because I didn't realize the Summit thing until a bit later.
Yeah.
So Nick, we've got your 5 truths and a lie here.
Is number 1 that he's a big deal?
Then I'm going to rule that out because I know that's true. All right.
I'm actually going to try and figure out if my team will put that on a business card. Like, I'm kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, let's see if that works.
That would be
It's
really
not
funny.
arrogant at all, but I could try.
Well, what you do is you then put like a little animated version of your face, like just black and white pencil drawing of the beard too. And it's like the big deal is the beard. All right.
Wow. That's a good deal. I mean, honestly, my barber, his business card is a small little black and white pencil drawing of his like face and his ginormous ZZ Top beard. That's what it is.
That's what I'm just describing. Yes. All right.
Yeah. Maybe I should rip that off.
You should. Number 1, got into Bible college on an acting scholarship. Number 2, almost dropped out of college to become a professional snowboarder.
Okay. Well, he lives in Colorado, in Denver area, so it's tracking.
I like how this is a story. Right out of college, I was in a Christian hippie jam band, played percussion drums, and played a showcase at the Gospel Music Awards.
Blake, can you name a single hippie jam band?
I didn't know that was a category until right now, but I love the term hippie jam band.
Okay, finish this name. The Grateful
Dead.
You got it.
Also, speaking of percussion, I found out at dinner last night that my wife played in band all of middle school, and I just found that out.
Oh, Blake.
Do y'all ever find out things about your wives that y'all are a little further along at this point? Do you still find out surprising things at this point that you didn't know about their lives?
I feel like I'm more surprised that she doesn't expect the things that I do still. She assumes that I'm going to be more mature, and I'm like, have you not known me for 22 years now? That's probably what I'm surprised about.
Yeah.
All right.
Not so much for me.
Number 4, I got my start in the church world doing puppets ministry. Okay.
That was a thing, Blake, back in the day.
I missed a good era then.
I don't know if it was a good era, but it was an era.
Number 5, been on the leadership team of Summit for almost 10 years. I swear, if that's the line, it's like 11 years. I'm going to call foul. Number 6, coffee and HiFi nerd.
Oh my gosh.
What is HiFi? HiFi?
HiFi.
HiFi nerd.
What is HiFi short for, Blake?
I'm assuming that's a type of drip coffee.
No.
Is it a musical thing?
Yeah.
Is it a band category?
No. High Fidelity.
Oh, the Taylor Swift song, High Fidelity.
Oh my gosh.
Or wait, maybe it was High Infidelity.
Dear God.
I know. We're going to have a whole new episode.
This guy.
We need a whole new podcast on it's entitled Educating Blake.
Toby was literally messaging with my mom on Facebook last night, talking about how he couldn't take the torch of parenting me from her. Okay.
There's a lot about just church and Christianity in here. What if the whole lie is he's like, I'm not actually even a Christian?
Satan worshiper for sure. Okay.
Oh, man.
I don't think he got in. Well, no, this is hard. I'm going to say that he did not almost drop out of college to become a professional snowboarder.
Well, dang it, Blake. I was going to choose that one too. So I'm going to go with, I'm going to say that he was not in a hippie jam band after college.
All right, Nick, we're locked in. What's your lie?
Well, you nailed it. I did actually almost drop out of college to snowboard full time, but it's not necessarily a profession. No one was paying me any kind of money. I was just kind of over school and done with it. And I love the mountains. I actually my parents live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I snowboarded at Santa Fe and Angel Fire and all those crazy places for years. And at that point in my college career, I was kind of done. I was like, I don't know if this is for me. And so I had this real kind of moment where I was contemplating that. But no, I didn't actually become a professional snowboarder, but it is a huge passion of mine. So, but the other stuff is actually all true. So I was definitely rocking the puppet ministry back in the day. So I used to do voices and man, I loved it. It was great. It was really, really fun.
But see,
especially
Nick,
when you're a middle school and high school kid.
college has served you so well. If you had dropped out, then what would you have used for 3 out of your 6 truths and a lie today? I mean, wasn't it worth those 4 years just for this moment?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it all now has come into full like perspective that I think, I can't deny it, so I appreciate that Bible college experience led me to where I am in this moment. So I'm grateful.
So this hippie jam band you were in right after college, is that very, Fish and Grateful Dead-esque?
Yeah, it was kind of like Bob Dylan meets, the Grateful Dead. And it was kind of this folk hippie jam band. It was called Stillwater Rhythm at the time. No connection actually to Stillwater, Oklahoma, where I also lived for a season as a church planter. But it was interesting. We used to open up for Waterdeep and 100 Portraits. And back in the day, there was this thing called Enter the Worship Circle that was kind of making its way through college campuses. And we were a part of kind of that wave of, hippie, jam band, worshipy, folk kind of music. It was just something different. But yeah, I did actually play a showcase at at some club during the week of Gospel Music Awards, kind of leading up to it. And then we actually played in the convention hall. It's almost like a trade show before the actual event itself, but we played there and it was kind of wild. We had a distribution deal, traveled around the Midwest, had some fun with it. But ultimately, man, like there was 6 of us trying to figure out how to do this full time. And that really, there's not a lot of money in being in a hippie worship jam band thing. So ultimately, we all kind of bowed out gracefully and kind of moved on down the road. But,
and did you ever have dreadlocks?
No, I did have quite long hair for a season. I didn't have the beard at that moment, and it wasn't the prettiest look. I actually was going through some old photos the other day, and I was like, "What were you thinking, man? That was terrible." But yeah, I had some long hair, but nothing dreaded up at all. I always thought that would be cool, but not for me.
Nick, you need to send the photo of that to us so I can put a poll up on what's the better hair situation for you right now.
Oh man, I don't know if that photo will ever be ready for public consumption. I mean, it might have been in a local newspaper clipping in Springfield, Missouri at the time, but yeah, I don't think I'm going to send that to you guys. That's a bad go.
I think the next 20 work hours of mine will be going through Missouri News Public Records
on microfiche.
Yeah, somewhere around the early 2000s, you'll find it. It's there. So.
Nick, can you explain to young little Blakey what HiFi is?
Well, so HiFi is honestly, I have so anybody who has poured a ton of money into a beautiful record setup, I would say, is definitely starting down that road of HiFi. High fidelity, for me, it's like I have this ridiculous dream system of, a HiFi setup in my house. And ultimately for me, I have a record player, but I also have an old CD player, which is really fun. I kind of broke out I just got off a 2-month sabbatical, and during that time I bought an old Sony CD player so that I could break out all of my old school 90s alternative music that I can't necessarily find on records. But that's kind of the dabbling into that. But for me, getting back to the source of what was it originally kind of created, and I think records kind of capture that depth and detail that ultimately you can't get in an MP3 file off Spotify or Apple, iTunes or any of those other kind of music services. So for me, it's about purity. It's about the way the mix engineer wanted it to sound, and ultimately trying to get to that as best as we humanly can with our ears. So.
Blake, I think you need to call your dad this afternoon and say, "Dad, can you explain to me what a HiFi system is?" And then he will say something along the lines of, "Son, I cannot believe how much I failed your education."
No, see, Toby, where do you think all this confidence comes from? My dad would not believe for a second he'd failed at something.
He'd just be like, "You idiot, you never listened to anything. We had a HiFi system back at home when you were growing up."
Well, speaking of, so that's like a record player, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, it's a
record player, but it's more than a record. Yeah, there's a pursuit in HiFi that is where you're constantly moving from. And this is the thing; it's a rabbit trail. You can start with a record player, most people do, and some decent speakers, and then you go, yeah, but there's you spend a little bit more money, you can actually get a little bit better sound. It's the same with, lots of, even it translates to our production world in regard to, we don't really love the way this PA is sounding. Okay, cool. Well, now we're going to go down this road that's a little bit nicer, a little bit more higher end, that kind of thing. And then the rabbit trail never stops because you can't actually get to perfect. I know people that have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on hi-fi setups and it sounds good, but is it perfect? No. But that's the thing. It's like this love-hate relationship. And you can ultimately find yourself, if you're not careful, going crazy trying to find that sound and that perfection.
It's like the pursuit of listening to music at the highest quality possible in your home environment.
Guys, I don't want to make you sick to your stomachs with envy, but I actually have one of the first record players ever made. I got this from my mom's mom, and it was I think the 1940s. I need to get it refurbished. It's just been sitting in my upstairs. My mom was going to sell it on Facebook Marketplace, had 100 people message her, and then was like, maybe this is worth more than I think it is. And I was like, yeah, Mom, you just give that to me. My cat will sit on it for 10 years, but I will get it refurbished eventually.
That's awesome. I don't know that even it's almost like a collector's item at that point that I don't know that you would even want to play it. I think it'd be one of those things that you'd want to dust off and kind of show as kind of, a really cool thing. But, it might still sound good. Depends. Technology's changed a little bit since then, but it's definitely worth leaning into. That's pretty cool.
Do you have cocktail ingredients displayed nearby, Blake?
See, my next house, I think that I'm going to make this the centerpiece of a room with the cocktail stuff around it. Yep. It's just in the center. One last question before we move off of that, since you guys are both audio nerds, I have always wondered this. Do CDs and records sound better than, as you say, something off of your phone? Just because it has a physical medium, it sounds better by default? Or is that just a assumption or a placebo?
Well, yes and no. So, I mean, there's so probably the best streaming service out there right now when it comes to getting the highest quality possible is, if you can stream a master off of Tidal or something of that nature. It sounds great. It sounds really, really good. But then you go into a CD situation and there is compression there to make it fit on that disc. And there is a certain crisp, kind of sound that comes from a CD that you just don't, it's hard to replicate. And you wouldn't get it any other way. And so I can literally go, put a record on, and you get warmth, you get depth, you get detail. The soundstage is massive. You could close your eyes and it feels like you're sitting in front of a stage, and you can pick out where the different instruments are. You can put a CD on, the soundstage gets a little bit smaller, and everything is kind of, you lose some of that, some of the tonality and some of the dynamics, but it still sounds really good. Then you can throw on, something from Apple Music or Spotify or something like that. And you go, oh, okay, it's not bad, but yeah, there's definitely some things missing. And then if you're streaming off Tidal, that's the closest thing that I actually would listen to. I think Tidal sounds better than most CDs, in my opinion. But you also have to have a really great kind of streaming device to be able to handle that, and a good DAC, a digital audio analog converter, that will allow that to kind of be played through the system in a way that actually kind of keeps some of that richness and that warmth and that detail. So that's been my experience, but I actually have done this experiment even with my kids who know nothing about any of this stuff. They love music and they're older. I have a sophomore, and she just finished her sophomore year in college, and my son just graduated. He had his last day of high school yesterday. He's graduating next week. So I've had them sit in my hi-fi room, close their eyes, and I've put on Miles Davis Kind of Blue on a record. I've put it on a CD. I've streamed it for them on 3 different services, and it's amazing how they immediately they wake up depending on which kind of version that I'm playing for them. But everybody comes back to the airy warmth and detail that comes from a record versus anything else.
And now I'm just imagining you as you're interviewing people for Summit, part of the interview process is, okay, I'm going to put this blindfold on you, sit you down, and see if you can tell the difference between these 3 sources. Because that's step one in maintaining a proper culture at a good integration company.
You're not wrong. It depends on the position. We have some really fun things that we do for interviews, and I'll tell you, that's not one of them. But I'm certainly going to get off the line here and talk to our HR team about that. Should be the next thing we do, and then ultimately too, it would force me to build a really nice HiFi setup here in the office, which I wouldn't be mad about. So that'd be kind of fun.
That would be nice. But speaking of the Summit office, tell us how you got into working at Summit. Why have you devoted all your working years to becoming an integrator, and what sets Summit apart? Tell us about the Summit difference.
Yeah, for sure. To be honest with you, we're going to go on a little bit of a rabbit trail because I never thought this is what I was going to do. This wasn't in my mind or in my heart to do. I'm a pastor's kid, a Bible college grad, a church planter, musician, and I traveled around and spoke for a little while doing arts and creative conferences and doing different things. And I was in a church plant, a part of a church plant in Stillwater, Oklahoma with we kind of had this college ministry that was exploding that we decided to do this wild experiment with. Instead of just having a Thursday night service, we decided to become a full-on church and try to see if we could make that happen. And so 15 of us were all support raising missionaries for a season to try and make this thing happen. We planted a church in the middle of the bar district of Oklahoma State University. We had 9 bars within 150 feet of our front door, and we started with about 450 college kids and then a few families to kind of try and make that thing happen. I was there for about 5 years, and we saw some really cool stuff. We saw some great things happen, and then I also learned that, as if this was new, but college kids are broke, and so ultimately that wasn't sustainable. Led a series of events, and I'm fast forwarding. Go check out my story on Summit TV if you haven't already. I kind of explain a little bit of that journey, but I pulled the ripcord and through a series of events and just said, man, I'm out. I was burnt. I was fried. And ultimately wasn't sure in that season of my life how I loved Jesus, but I was really just struggling with some things that I had experienced in the church world. Fast forward, we left Stillwater. We moved to Colorado. We knew a couple people here, but not very many. And ultimately we were like, we got to start over. I had 2 small kiddos at the time and had a cool opportunity. I was a part of a coffee shop that I had run in Oklahoma for a little bit. And we had plans to maybe do something out here next to CU campus. And all of that kind of fell through. I started working in the tech industry. And because Boulder kind of has a little bit of like a mini Silicon Valley kind of vibe. There's a lot of VC startups and a lot of technology and a lot of stuff that's happening. And so I kind of stumbled into that and was playing music on the side with some connections that I had through the years of playing music before, and found myself at an arts and creative conference where I was playing drums and really didn't know quite what to do or why I was really there other than, hey, I'm going to play a set and I'm leaving. Next thing I know, I was asked to join the leadership team, and I helped run that thing for 7.5 years or so. And through that, I met the founder of Summit. I reached out to Chris Rayburn and said, hey man, would you be willing to sponsor us? And he said, well, let's have a lunch. So we had a lunch together. He ended up saying no. But we struck up a friendship in that moment. And 3 or 4 years later, he sent me a text message and said, hey, I want to talk to you about an opportunity. And to be honest with you, like everybody, it seemed like in that era of time in the church world was getting into like Amway or some sort of like multi-level marketing thing where they were like,
essential oils.
You need vitamins and, doTERRA. They're not sponsoring this, so I probably shouldn't say anything. But there's a handful of like, multi-level marketing things were happening. And when I had gotten a text several times about, or it was financial planning services. And it was like, I was just so turned off by the wording of, hey, I want to talk to you about an opportunity. I was like, no, man, I'm good. Like, no way. He's like, well, come meet me for dinner at least, and let's talk about it. It's with Summit. And I was like, oh, okay. Thanks for the clarity. But I was set, man. I was having fun. I was employee number 13 at this crazy tech company where it was a VC backed company, and we were raising hundreds of millions of dollars together. I was helping them tell their brand story and figure out like their position in the market and all that kind of stuff, and doing ministry stuff on the side. I was happy. But after I met with them, the wheels started turning, and we met up again. And after about 3 weeks of having conversation, I submitted all this to a bunch of business mentors of mine, guys that aren't even believers. And every single one of them were like, "You're stupid if you don't take this job." And so I did. And I came on to do some sales, to do some marketing. And almost 7.5, 8 years later, myself and my business partner, Tyson, we bought the company from the founder, and now we own it. So it's wild. We were 23 people then, and now we're pushing over 60, 65-ish people. And things have grown, things have evolved, and things have changed. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be here. So,
and Nick, you, every time I talk to you, it feels like, there's hundreds of integrators out there, but there's a little something that makes you guys different, from, kind of your passion, your heart. What do you tell churches, potential clients, that like, why are you guys different than every other integrator?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And to be honest with you, I struggle to answer it because, I've got friends in this industry that are other integrators, and I think they do great work, and I have much respect for them. And so I try not to get too much into the comparison game when it comes down to it, because we are all different. I think our approach is different. I think that we constantly, I don't fully know the ins and outs of their process, but I know that for us, most of the people on our team are people who care very, very deeply about the Capital C Church. They've either come from it, they've worked in it, or have been on staff at churches, kind of a thing. But for us, we really care about, not so much about, yes, we are a technology company. That's not the driving factor behind what we do. What we're trying to do is trying to figure out who the church is. We want to understand what their mission is. What's the story of God in their community? What is it that they feel they're called and created to do? And then how can we match that with a technology solution? So regardless of the project, you're going to see some names and some brands that are probably very similar, but the way in which they overlap, or the way they're implemented, I should say, is much different based on the mission and the vision of the church. And I think for us, it's not about let's do the coolest, dopest technology, which I do love. And I think that's great. And at times we get to flex in that particular way. But really the thing that drives us is trying to leverage technology to help communicate the gospel. For us, we take it down to we start thinking about the person sitting in the seat, and that's the driving force behind what we do. For me, it's marriages are going to be healed in this environment. We're creating a space where people are going to be able to walk away from addiction, where they're going to get to bump into Jesus for the first time and be radically saved. That to me is what blows my hair back and gets me out of bed. Technology is the way and the vehicle that kind of helps us do that. And I think we have a really smart team and a really great group of guys and ladies that are working here to kind of help all further that mission. And that to me is really what kind of, I would say, is different maybe about us, but that's something that it's not just something we put on a t-shirt or we put on our website. It's something we actually really care about. And ultimately, man, we're just trying to make an impact in the church world and ultimately in communities across the country.
And I assume you have to do a lot of managing of expectations. I can imagine a church reaching out and saying, "Hey, I just watched Transformations live stream, and we want to accomplish that at our church. And somebody recommended you guys." Like, where does that conversation start for you and the church?
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is that's honestly the conversation that we have all day long, every day. Is we saw this and we'd like to do that. That's cool. That's a great way to start the conversation. But in reality, we want to dig in a little deeper. We actually want to understand, like, why do you want to do that? And I think that one of the things that we constantly hear, because Life Church is a client of ours and has been for years, we've been journeying in conversations with them for 10 plus years. I mean, even before I was around. And ultimately, when someone says, well, if it's good enough for Craig, I want that in my system. It's like, well, okay, wait, hold on. This has evolved over the years. And ultimately, we need to kind of take a step back and figure out where is it that you really want to go? What's the driving force behind the statement of I want to do that? And then ultimately, we start to ask some questions around budget and timelines. And a lot of times we get a lot of people with, there's a lot of folks that I just don't think they understand the costs when it comes down to some of the technology solutions that some of these big churches that we see on, YouTube or having their own apps to, stream services from. I don't think we fully understand the budgets that they have, as well as also the purpose behind why they're doing what they're doing. I mean, if you think about Life Church, 90+% of the over 90% of the people that are seeing Craig's messages are watching through the lens. They're not there. You know what I mean? It's all video teaching. And so ultimately they've poured a great expense into their video system, which is gorgeous and amazing and does great things for them to allow them to do what they feel like they want to do and what they're called to do. But if you look at it, they don't have the craziest PA. They don't have the craziest consoles. They don't have, and that's intentional. And so I think that a lot of people, that's missed on them. And they just kind of try and look at it as if it's a buffet. They're like, we want the video system from a Transformation, Elevation, or a Life Church. We want the, worship to be just like Elevation. And so we want it to melt your face off. And we want this, that, and the other. And we've got a Burger King budget. And I go, oh, wait, hold on a second. Like, we got to understand expectations, and we got to understand, like, where is it that you're really trying to go and why? And then from there, we can start to kind of really have some of those conversations about how we implement some technology to help them.
So Blake and I had a fun little interaction where
is this going?
I was completely in Vision Land and Blake was completely in Tactical Land. Is that where you live, Blake?
Yeah, the tactical tank.
And so we were, negotiating or arguing over video budget to meet my expectations. So as you approach projects with churches, like, who do you need to pull in and make sure they're on the same page? Do you need the lead pastor and the tech guy to understand, the same language, to know what the vision versus the budget is actually going to get both of them?
And is it the exec pastor also being pulled in so that someone will actually approve the purchase of all of this?
Yeah. When it's usually a mix of all of those, to be honest with you. And early on in my Summit career, I kind of the typical MO was we would get called by a production guy at the church, tech fella at the church. Our PA is terrible, and we want a new console, we want all this. And I'm like, cool, that's it's roughly a couple $100,000 or whatever the case may be. And then we'd start asking questions about vision, or we'd ask questions about the church, and it would like slowly trailing off. Did I catch a niner in there? Like, what's happening right now? Like, there was some things there that weren't quite translating from leadership into technology. And so it felt like for a few seasons there, all we were doing was creating wish lists for tech guys at churches to go try and pitch to their leadership and figure out like, how is this really going to work? And can I get some money so I can go buy this thing? That dog won't hunt at the end of the day. And so for us, we actually try really hard to get someone from the executive leadership team to be a part of the conversation, someone, hopefully an exec pastor, because a lot of times what we find is that what the production folks want versus the actual perceived need of the leadership team is different. And so trying to get them to talk and to get them to have conversation and facilitate that is kind of an awkward, tense place to sit at times. But ultimately, in the end, I think it helps us have a more successful outcome when we can actually get them all speaking and in the same language and understanding each other. I have a situation right now where there's a pastor friend of mine who his tech guys engaged us and had this ginormous list of stuff that they wanted. And when you start asking them where they're getting their influences from, it's all the usual names. But then if you talk to the pastor and the leadership team, all they want is simple church. All they want is a good sounding PA lights that aren't freaking anybody out, and they want every seat to be able to hear the gospel. They don't necessarily care about LED walls and, high production and all those things. They want it tasteful, clean, and simple. Completely opposite of what was being presented originally. And so trying to help facilitate that, you have to sit in awkward and uncomfortable. But in the end, I think the church wins and we win when we're a little less antsy to just fulfill the needs of one individual and go, wait, guys, for us to do this and for you to do this and to have scale and to have sustainability and to have a great impact in your church, we need to circle the wagons here around vision and around what you really want to do. Where is it that you see the church in 5 years from now? And then ultimately kind of tease some of those things out. That helps become the lens that we filter everything through.
And do you kind of feel like God has uniquely gifted you to kind of see both angles since you lived in the pastoral world and you also get the tech side?
Yeah, it's funny you say it that way. Up until a couple of years ago, I don't know that I would have been able to articulate it in that or say it in that particular way, because I kind of have always said, man, I just sort of stumbled into this, right? But if scripture is true, I had a good friend remind me of this the other day. If scripture is true and it says the steps of the righteous are ordered by God, then ultimately I would agree with you and say that all of my past history, background as a musician, as a speaker, as a communicator, as a pastor's kid who my dad was a professional guitar player, like I've always cared about these things and I've been the beneficiary of these things. And I speak the language of both sides. And so ultimately, I think that we as Summit, we get the opportunity to kind of sit in that land and straddle the fence between the two. And ultimately, that's why, a huge percentage of the work that we do, I believe, is just repeat work from the same clients, because ultimately we've forged something there from a place of relationship that we've grown as they grow. And that's been a huge part of our success.
So, Blake, if we follow that logic, does that mean that God ordained you to sit next to me here and
be the first full-time employee at Church Gear and lead the brand? Yes, sir.
Punishment for my sin?
Here's the thing, Toby. I'll tell you what I told my wife the other day. If you actually were punished for your sin, you wouldn't live 2 seconds. So, we can't bear it.
That's a good point.
You can't bear it.
And is your marriage to Allison punishment for her sin too?
100%. But see, it's a slow punishment. Speaking of punishment, leaving a project could feel that way to a church. And not all projects go smoothly. So tell us, what would make Summit walk away from a project? What's some signs that, a church wants to be a customer? They have those grand visions, like you said, but you can tell they're not really ready, whether it's, their staff communicating well amongst each other or the size of the project, et cetera, et cetera. What do you do in those moments? How do you handle that?
Yeah. So, there's, well, I'll say it this way. We've never taken a client on and then left a project. We've never done that. We've never just been like, nope, we're out, pull the ripcord, see ya. No, we have turned a lot of work away. That's part of, that's part of just business, right? When it comes down to, it could be everything from their timeline and budget doesn't align. It means we can't get gear in time, things like that. If there's a bunch of demands and it's like, I can't make that happen. We have roughly 55 to 60-ish projects a year that we do. And ultimately, I only have so many people and I only have so much bandwidth. So sometimes that would be a situation that we would say, oh man, I'm so sorry that we can't make that happen. Mainly the reason why we would not take a project on is that it just doesn't fit relationally for us. We're actually not looking for another business transaction. We're looking for relationship and partnership. And if it doesn't necessarily feel like that right up front, or if we feel like we're just a commodity, hey, we need a bid and give us a price and see you later. It's like, well, okay, wait, that's not fun. That doesn't get us out of bed in the morning, right? And so ultimately for us, we go through a pretty extensive process of kind of interviewing and talking through some of these things with the client to really get a sense of, just as much as they're interviewing us, we're interviewing them, and trying to make sure that this is a good fit for our team. Because truthfully, man, I feel like us as client relations, the people that are out front having these conversations with churches, we're the keepers of the door to our organization. And ultimately, I've got 60 something people behind me that I want to make sure that if I introduce them to this person, I'm introducing them to a friend, someone that they can work with, someone that they can have a relationship with, and someone that there's a mutual level of respect and kindness going back and forth. And so for me, I'm really thinking about protecting my team because there's a lot of dysfunction in the church world. We've seen this over and over and over again. And unfortunately, that's just the case where church is made up of human beings, which are broken and fallible and all kinds of things. And so ultimately, sometimes that dysfunction kind of creeps its way into some of these transactions. And I'm really, really, really cautious to sniff some of that stuff out because ultimately I need to protect my team and the mission and the heart that these guys carry. Because ultimately, man, we really do care about trying to treat our people internally with a ton of care and a ton of kindness. And ultimately, we want this to be a really great environment for them. And sometimes I have to say it, there are some churches or some organizations that we've come in contact with that it's an environment I really wouldn't want to put my people in. I know that sounds harsh and mean, but it's truth. And so ultimately for us, man, we've been really fortunate to have great partnerships with some incredible churches doing really cool stuff to reach their communities. But just because we get the phone call doesn't mean we're going to take the project. It just doesn't always work out that way. But sometimes when budget and expectations don't necessarily align, or we sniff out some kind of dysfunction relationally, or if it just feels like a commodity type, hey, give me this and I want speakers, hang them. It's like, I don't know. That's not really our jam. We want to work with cool people, and we really want to feel like we're in this thing as a relationship, not a transaction.
And how often, Nick, do you guys have to come in and clean up somebody else's mess?
And we won't say any names, but I'm assuming that happens.
Yeah, often. Yeah. There's a lot of folks that we've encountered over the years. I mean, Summit's been in business for 26 years. So we've been around the game for a minute. And I've been here for almost 10. And there's different moments of that, or different kind of styles where people were overpromised something and underdelivered, or midway through the project, there was something that happened relationally that a contractor was fired, or someone came in and sold a church a bill of goods a few years ago, and it was an astronomical price. There was one specific one I remember right now where the church had paid some crazy amount of money for a whole system. And ultimately, man, it was the weirdest PA design that I had ever encountered in my life. And ultimately, we've got signed on, we took that thing down, redeployed it, added some things to it, tried to help the church save some money. But we wanted to do it the right way. And so we see that often, unfortunately. And at the end of the day, it's like, man, we really believe in bringing excellence to the table and trying our best at every single one of these projects. We say we're only as good as our last install project. And we do a constant debrief. We have almost 700 projects probably under our belt at this point. But we're at a point of going, man, we're only as good as the last one. So, and we have all kinds of points along the way where we're checking in with the client, we're checking in with our internal team, we're checking in with the trades to make sure that we're not just like saying that as something grandiose and this cool idea to shoot for, but are we actually hitting it? And if not, then what measures are we taking to have some course correction and to really help make sure and ensure that we do a good job for the church, because they deserve it. This message is too important for us to just sort of kind of throw up just whatever kind of an effort. For us, it's like, man, we're all in on this thing. So it's important for us to do that.
And what are some of the most common mistakes you see churches make when they, cut corners, or they don't do their homework on hiring an integrator that takes them for a ride? Do you see these common things that are coming up over and over again that you guys have to come in and redeploy, so to speak?
Yeah. So there's, going all the way back to even like a bid scenario. There's this thing in the church world where church boards love 3 bids. And ultimately, even if the church has an existing relationship with an integrator, a lot of times when it comes to a project, they're like, well, just to check price, we need 3 bids on this, and it's like, cool. Not all those bids are the same. There's a major difference between, a turnkey solution versus someone who's going to bill you labor later. And ultimately, I've seen that come back to bite churches. They'll go, hey, here's our number from an integrator, and it's less than everybody else. And so the board's like, that's the one. And then later they get several bills for just, oh, what's this $20,000? What's this $40,000? Oh, well, that's labor for the project that we didn't put in our original, quote. And it's like, oh, well, that's different. Right. And so that's kind of not necessarily apples to apples. And then I think too, churches don't necessarily fully understand what, they're getting sometimes when it comes down to trade coordination and how in depth that really is. Some integrators like to work with other trades. Some people don't. They want it to be, hey, as soon as the building's done and you've got your CO, then we'll come in and figure it out after the fact. Well, that's not necessarily great because usually when churches get their certificate of occupancy, they want to start having church immediately. And so ultimately, it's kind of a mess there. The other things that we see is when it comes to skimping and cutting corners is a lot of times people will fight us on acoustics. We don't really need that. Okay, well, trust me, you do. Well, we'll just do it ourselves. Okay, that's great. You can totally do that. Here's kind of what we would recommend. And we always come up with a design and a plan and try and help them. But when people skimp on that, it really takes away from this incredibly nice PA that they just purchased. The fidelity is just not there. The intelligibility from a speaking perspective isn't there. And ultimately, too, if the room is super live and vibrant, anytime someone gets up that has any sort of like a high heel shoe on or anything, you can hear it, across the congregation. And then ultimately you're distracted and you just completely lost that point that the pastor was talking about. So those types of things are ways in which they, folks can sometimes be short-sighted. And then also too, I think, when it comes down to it, you see sometimes people they want the immediate right now, and they don't necessarily think about how they're going to use it. What else is, potentially in the works a handful of years, from now. And so ultimately sometimes they put in systems that you would go, okay, cool. But then you get the phone call 2 years later. Well, actually we need to do X, Y, or Z, or, whatever the case may be. So I would always just tell people to not be short-sighted, to really do your homework and to really ask a lot of questions. We actually had a situation where there was a multiple bid scenario, and we kept getting all these weird questions around labor and travel and some other stuff, because we're, 95% of the work that we do is outside of the state of Colorado. So there's going to be some of those costs involved. But when it came down to it, the integrator that we were coming against, all those numbers looked really, really small for them. But come to find out later, they had this ginormous number for shipping. And it was like, wait, hold on a second. There's a ton of money here that ultimately is not just, it can't cost that much money to ship a few pieces of gear from your spot to this location. And you're actually a heck of a lot closer than we are. So ultimately, that's where sometimes people get a little creative with how they put those bids together so that it looks good for a board, but in reality, it's just not apples to apples. Unfortunately, that's just kind of the game that's played sometimes.
Like, I almost feel like I should have gotten multiple bids before hiring you, because I'm wondering, like, are you, I don't pay you. Are you going to bill me for labor later? Is that what's going to happen?
Oh, Toby, the labor with interest is coming. It's going to be intense.
This
the juice is rolling on that one, buddy.
And speaking of something that could be intense, I've got to ask this question. It was my favorite on the outline. I'm sorry, Toast, but this is where I want to go here. Tell us some blunt truths you've had to give. Not some blunts you've given, but some blunt truths that you've had to give. Was that too far?
I mean, no, he was in a jam band. There were blunts involved.
I was in a jam band. We're in Colorado. Hey, it is what it is.
So you don't have to. You could pick all three if you have one. But even if it's just your favorite of the three, have you ever had to? What's a blunt truth you've had to communicate either to a pastor, an executive pastor or a church tech on one of these integration projects, whether it's, hey man, this is going to cost more than you think, or hey man, this isn't going to do the vision you have, or hey man, this is going to, not fulfill all of your wildest dreams as a tech?
Man, that's a tough one, to be honest with you. I think blunt truth is something that's you first have to have relationship so that you can get into that. If not, you just come across as super rude and arrogant and mean.
Well, that's where the blunt comes. That's where the blunt comes in before the truth.
Right. So I like to try and figure out how to kind of lace that delicately. But I think that there's been oftentimes we've had some churches that when they do a new building project, it's always interesting. Sometimes they have funding, they have cash on hand. Sometimes they have to work with a specific funding institution as well as like a general contractor, and sometimes that general contractor can hold the budget real tight. So we've had some hard conversations around when in some scenarios like that where the general contractor funding institution told us this is the budget no matter what. And then we've had a church go, yeah, but we want all of this. And it's like, that doesn't work. And so ultimately our job is never to tell them what they can afford and what they can't afford. That's not my role at all as Summit. I'm going to always try and take what churches are trying to do and get that within the budget that's being allotted. And if we can't get there, then ultimately it's a conversation around expectation and also ultimately about finances. In that particular scenario, we were showing a church a bunch of different systems around a certain area in the country. We're touring through some stuff of all systems that would have appeased the budget, and pastor was not having it. And so ultimately, we just had to pull him aside and go, look, because you could tell he was like, this isn't what I'm wanting. This isn't where I want to go. This isn't okay. Well, then we have to have a fundraising conversation, or we need to get the funding institution on board a little bit more to help be able to fulfill the vision that you're looking for. I'm not going to be the guy to tell you yes or no. I'm going to always try and figure out how we can do it based on the dollars that are being presented. But in this particular case, we had to pull the pastor aside and have a hard conversation around expectations of what he was wanting versus the budget that the funding institution was giving him. And his words to me were, "Don't you worry about it. I got it." And I was like, okay. And ultimately, I think he raised like 3 times the amount of what the funding institution said, and he got the system he wanted. Let's just say that. And so
that's one way to go about it.
He knew some people with some funding opportunity that would want to fund an opportunity like this, and ultimately was able to make it happen. The other that I think would be a blunt truth is more so with production people. They just get really excited and locked in on the latest and greatest piece of gear. And it's really evident sometimes when that piece of gear is really being filtered through their wants and needs versus the overall vision of the church. And it can create a lot of relational tension between leadership and the tech folks. And so I've had to coach a number of tech people through tempering their excitement around the things that they want and really stepping outside of that and beginning to ask some questions around what is it that the leadership wants? And how do you begin to create relationship? Because ultimately they have no relationship. It's there's most of the time that relationship between the production folk and anybody on the executive team is pretty minimal. And it's really, really hard when you're trying to create synergy. If you don't know the mind and the heart of your pastor, how is it that you're going to be able to make good technology decisions for the community going forward? That's a terrible place of stewardship. You're just literally shooting into the dark and hoping you hit something. And so for me, it's the reason you're having so much difficulty or so much challenge is because when was the last time you knocked on your pastor's door or went to his assistant and said, "Hey, I need 10 minutes with him. I'd love to bring him a coffee and just sit down and talk and hear about his heart and figure out what it is that we're trying to do so that I can support him better." That doesn't happen all that often. And ultimately it's a conversation that I wish more and more production folks would actually do. Get out from behind the console, get out from the tech space and go figure out what's going on with the leadership, figure out who they are as people, because they can become not only your big advocate, but they can become your biggest fan. And ultimately there's unity and synergy that's created, relational currency that's built, and things go a heck of a lot smoother.
Blake, I feel like we still need that having a hard conversation with your pastor episode. I feel like it needs to be a bonus episode at some point, because that can be a scary thought. As Nick, I'm sure you've experienced this. Like, the tech guy almost feels like, hey, I'm the only person on staff that doesn't have pastor in my title. I can't go to my senior pastor. And yeah, you can. It's just, you got to approach it with, respect and do it the right way. But yeah, it's super important to build that relationship.
Yeah, it's definitely one that I hear all the time. And honestly, man, sorry to cut you off. I just think that most people think that that's not possible. And I just say, man, how is it then that you're supposed to support the community from a technology perspective if you actually don't know what the vision and the mission is from the pastor himself, or anybody on the executive team at that matter. And so ultimately, I think that it's really important to foster that relationship and to begin to build as much relational currency as possible. Most of the time, those relationships are really just kind of, hey, this piece of gear failed. I've got 3 quotes on what I want to replace it with. Are you okay with me doing one of these? And it's like, okay, wait, that's nuts. You're asking for anywhere from, tens of thousands of dollars to hundreds of thousands of dollars in that moment. And you've not once sat down and had a coffee with that guy and asked anything about life and told them anything about your story. And you expect for that to go smoothly. That's crazy. That's crazy talk. I know even when my kids, who are, 17 and 19, come to me and go, Dad, I need X from a dollar's perspective. I'm like, okay, hold on a second. Like, let's talk about this. So if you think, magnify that, you have no relationship other than you hand him his microphone before he goes out on stage potentially, or you're in the booth during sound check, and you come to them wanting hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you've not paved the way of relationship. You're barking up the wrong tree, and I don't know that if that's a sustainable approach, and it's probably not the best approach in my opinion.
See, this is why I spent 3 years getting to know Toby before I asked him for the $12K I needed for the video gear, and it still went poorly.
No, you asked me for $15,000, and I said I bet you could do it for 10, and then you ended up spending around 12.
Yes.
So we negotiated.
Yeah. But that is honestly, and all joking aside, I mean, me and Toby spent a great deal of time together, and that was still probably top 3 most difficult work moments we've had. So you really do need that relationship before you start talking big budgets. Nick,
it's trust.
Yeah.
It's just trust. Time spent equals trust. So ultimately, that's one of the things that people try to fast track past and think, oh no, this is going to be fine. No, it's not actually. We got to think about this a little bit bigger.
Did you hear that, Toby? Nick just said it's not going to be fine. Toby's motto at Church Gear is, it'll be fine.
I just heard that you and I have to spend more time together.
It'll be fine.
No, it won't. It will not be fine.
So, Nick, I'd like for you to pull one more rabbit out of your hat to wrap us with a tech takeaway, man. Give us something that if you had a group of church tech directors with you, this would be your unique piece of advice. And feel free to make it integrator focused if you'd like, since that's totally your world, or something just from your church days.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I would say. This is something that was mentioned earlier. Pastor is not necessarily in the title of most tech people, but yet you're responsible for translating the mission and the vision of the church into a technology, situation there, and being able to use technology to help the mission of the gospel go forward, and the mission of the community go forward. You have a whole slew of volunteers that it takes to pull that off and to make that happen, and ultimately to ignore the thought, or to completely just say, no, that's not me. If you are not pastoring your volunteer team and caring for them, then I think you're missing a huge opportunity to make a difference in your community. If you really want long-term sustainability with your volunteer team, you have to begin to care for their hearts more than you care for the fact that they're a body sitting in a position helping you execute on the weekend. And so ultimately, these are people who are giving of their time, of their talents, and of their resources. And these people are walking through life, and life is really messy and life is really sticky. You have no idea what they're dealing with at work. You have no idea what they're dealing with at home. But even a simple hello, how are you doing? Is there anything crazy going on in your week? Is there a way that I could pray for you? Or is there something I could pray for you about? That would go a long way into creating a healthier culture within your tech volunteer team. So don't ignore the role and the responsibility to pastor and to steward people. We always talk about stewardship as a thing of money, but it's actually, I would say, you got to take that further and think about people's time and think about people's hearts and how are you managing and stewarding their investment in the ministry. And so I think that that's one of the biggest things. The second kind of takeaway that I would say is if you haven't had or do not have a more regular sync up with someone on the or point of connection with someone on the executive team, stop listening to this podcast right now, put it on pause, come back to it later, schedule an appointment, buy a coffee, and ask for, 15, 20 minutes of their time just to get to know who they are. Because ultimately, I just think it's really, really, really important for those teams to create relationship because ultimately, how many tech guys do I talk to throughout the year that say, man, I just feel like I'm on an island. I don't feel like I have any connection, or I feel like I'm just, responsible to, get here super early, make everything happen. And then it's a thankless job. And the only time I hear from somebody is when something goes wrong. Okay, cool. What are you doing about that to change it? Instead of just accepting that as a reality, I think it's important to take ownership of it and say, maybe you aren't approachable, or maybe they don't feel like you're approachable, or maybe they don't understand you. And so therefore they've avoided you. Well, okay, that's not awesome. However, I think you can do something about it. And I think that it starts with just saying, hey, could you open the door to relationship? It means putting yourself out there. You might get rejected the first time, or it might be incredibly awkward. That's just part of life. And ultimately lean into the uncomfortable, lean into the awkward, and pave relationship, because it's very, very, very important to start putting some deposits in the relational currency bank, because there are going to be moments where those deposits are going to be withdrawn. And so ultimately you want a few more in the bank than necessary, I would say.
Man, that volunteer thing really strikes deep, because my best friend's a worship pastor, and his volunteer team has gone from 6 to 20 something. And he talks about like their personal lives and how it weighs on him, and like how he really feels the pastor part of the worship pastor, maybe even more so than the worship part. So that's really true. That's really good, Nick. Man, we appreciate you coming on. What would you like to plug other than Summit, obviously?
Yeah, check us out, summitintegrated.com, and always hit us up on socials. We've got a bunch of cool things that are being launched and in the midst right now. We actually are working on some neat things. I can't totally tease out everything, but there's a thing called Link that's coming that's going to be kind of a coaching development kind of platform. We've created a bunch of incredible content that's really helpful, not just from a leadership perspective, but also from a tech perspective on certain things around all kinds of different topics. But we're launching that, and there's ultimately a cohort where we're putting a bunch of different people together from all different areas and all different sized churches, and we're learning and growing together. So for us, it's more so than just, hey, we're always going to train on the systems that we install, but there's an ongoing development piece that I think is really necessary, especially in this day and age where we're seeing tech and production folks and creatives kind of dropping like flies in the church communities and going, man, I'm out, I'm done. I'm not resourced enough. I feel alone. I'm on an island, blah, 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 blah. So for us, we're really trying to try and help connecting people's character with their craft and trying to help them stay in the game. because ultimately I believe that, we have a really cool opportunity to make an impact in the church world. Because as we do that and we serve the church and we serve the community, they have some wind in their sails and a little bit of a spring in their step to go and serve their communities. And ultimately, we don't necessarily have to wait till heaven for we start to see the kingdom of God kind of transforming communities. And so for us, that's one of the things that we're doing right now.
That's awesome, man. We definitely see a lot of people dropping like flies, as you say. I mean, we've kind of joked if everybody leaves the church to be an integrator or to work at Church Gear or to work at MXU or wherever, like all these people that serve the church, we're like, who's going to be left at the church if everyone leaves? So
right.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, it's a big problem, and it's definitely something that kind of keeps me up at night. The amount of phone calls I get from folks saying, "Hey, I want to come work for you or for someone like you. Do you know anything? Do you have any openings?" I'm like, okay, wait, hold on a second. Let's actually really search this out to make sure we understand what we're getting ourselves into. But man, for me, part of my story was burnout, and ultimately some church hurt, some church abuse. You see that across the board. A bunch of us have it. We could all, raise our hands and tell a crazy horror story. But truthfully, man, I believe there's something beautiful when we stay in the game and ultimately continue to keep fighting for what we believe in, and being led by the Holy Spirit and allowing the heart of Jesus to be made present in what we're doing. I think it's really important, but it's important to also have community and people you can talk to and folks that'll help encourage you and say they see you, because I think that's one of the things about tech folks. I mean, I know we joke all the time, we're always in black and we're always faded into the shadows, but it's really important for us as an integrator and as a company that gets to kind of work alongside a lot of these great communities to look a lot of these folks in the eyes and go, man, I see your investment. I see what you're doing. I see your heart and your devotion to excellence, and try and help build people up, help kind of just hopefully shoulder some of that weight, some of that burden.
A really encouraging word to go out on. Nick, we appreciate you coming on, man. Thanks,
guys.
Thanks for hanging out with us. We hope to see you back next week for more absurd stories, tech takeaways, and overall buffoonery here at the Church Gear Studios.
Blake, have you ever wondered what is underneath this beautiful exterior just covered in hair?
I would guess blood and guts and organs.
No, I mean, there's skin underneath my hair.
Toby, are you inviting me to look at your skin? Because this is getting weird.
I mean, I'm just saying, if I shaved, I would basically be Chuck Norris.
Oh, well, no, Chuck Norris always has a beard. You know why Chuck Norris has a beard? Because only Chuck Norris can cut Chuck Norris. And what would cut us deep to our soul and make us feel great is if you said, you know what, this episode, I should text it to a buddy. Don't you think so, Toby? Don't you think that'd make us feel good?
I think they should text this episode along with their favorite Chuck Norris meme.
Yes.
That's going to make your buddy's day.
Or just, you know what? Screw it. Let's be weird. Just post your favorite Chuck Norris meme and tag us, and I'll repost at least one of those at random with no context. It'll be hilarious.
Beautiful.